Hello and welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to be sharing with you how to draft a Victorian corset with a structured upper part. So if you haven't yet subscribed, please hit on the subscribe button. Let's dive right into today's video. So first, I've marked out my basic measurement, which is my shoulder to bust, shoulder to underbust, shoulder to waistline, and my top length. So the top length for the front is 22 inches. So for this pattern, I'm making use of bust dart. So my front pattern is 1.5 inches longer than my back pattern. So my back pattern is 20.5 inches. So now I'll just go ahead to mark my neckline. So we won't be making use of this neckline because we're still going to cut it off. So I'll mark my shoulder divided by 2, which is 14 divided by 2. I have 7. Come down by 1 inch and I'm going to connect it back to my neckline, creating my shoulder slope. And I'm going to go ahead to outline it. So after that, I'm going to find my chest line, which is my bust circumference divided by 6 plus 1.5 inches, giving me 7 inches. So at that point, I'm going to rule a straight line. After ruling that straight line, I'm going to connect it down this way. Then go ahead, divide what I have at this point into 2, and I will go in by half. So after going in by half, I'm going to connect it down and take it up. You can as well measure your bust circumference at this part. So next, I'm just going to go ahead to outline my armhole curve, and this is what I have. And now I'll be marking my bust band divided by 2, which is my nipple to nipple divided by 2, which is 7 divided by 2. I have 3.5. I'll go ahead and mark it. So after that, I'll go ahead and I will connect all the lines that I marked. So after marking it, the next step is to connect it down to my shoulder. I'll divide what I have left into 2 and I'll fold my tape this way, mark the middle, and I'm going to connect it back to my chest line. So after connecting it back to my chest line, I'm going to be taking 1 inch dart on my waistline and on my under bust. And for a plus size, you can go ahead and mark 1.5 inches. So I'm going to connect it down, and this is what I have. And next, I will take it down to my top length this way, then connect the other parts also. So I'll go ahead and I will outline it to make it more visible for you to see. So after I'm done outlining it, I'm going to draw my cup. So to draw my cup, I'm just going to connect from my bust down to my under bust, and while drawing this, I'm not going to make it too curvy so that while joining it, it will be easier for me. This is a Victorian corset, so I have like so many joining to do on it, so I'm not going to make it too deep. So this is what I have at this point. So from my chest line, you can decide to go up by 3.5 or 4, or you can place and come down by your shoulder. So from that part, I came down by 3 inches, and I'm going to draw a straight line to serve as a guide. Now at the upper part, I'll just be taking ½ inch dart so that when I'm joining it, it's not going to be very difficult or create an irregular shape. So on this part, I'll mark 0.75, and I will be taking my dart from that point. So now what I'm going to do is just to get my ruler, and I'll connect from that 0.5 inches, and at this part I will connect it down. So after connecting, what I have at this part, I don't really like it, so I'm just going to go ahead to readjust it a bit, and all I'm going to do is just to clean off that part and retrace it with my ruler. Now I'm going to go ahead to outline it so that it's going to be more visible. So after I'm done outlining it, this is what I have. So the next step we're going to take right now is to draw out the neckline. From the chest line, I'll come down by ½ inch. 1 inch, and I'll go ahead to connect it back to the upper part. So after drawing it, to draw the neckline for the other part, I'm going to blend it this way to make sure it meets at this point, just this way. So once your upper part is meeting, you're just going to draw out this part. So I'll connect it back to my armhole and I readjust it carefully so that it will match what we have at the thumbnail. So after doing this, I'm just going to mark 3 inches. So this is not a standard. You can use your nipple to nipple divided by 2. You can just decide to use 2.5 inches. All I'm trying to do is to create a line where I'm going to take my second dart, because this is a Victorian corset and it has multiple darts. So now for my dart, I'll just take 1/2 inch on both sides, and at the under bust I'm also going to take that. So you can decide not to mark 1/2 inch at the under bust. You can just mark at the waistline and connect it all the way. So I'll just go ahead and connect it down to my top length and connect it to the upper part of my pattern this way. So to make sure your Victorian corset does not bulge out at the waist, like giving the waist a good fitting, I'm going to be taking a dart here. I'll mark 1/2 inch at the waist, then I'll go ahead to extend it upwards, and after that I'm also going to extend it downwards, and after connecting, this is what I have. Now the next step is to insert my body circumference. At the bust, I'll mark the bust circumference divided by 4. Go ahead and measure the dart intake I have at this point. I'm going to replace it, and I'll go ahead to mark the sewing allowance. At the under bust, I'll take my under bust measurements and I'm going to mark. After marking that, I will go ahead and measure the dart intake I have here. I will replace it, then go ahead and measure the second dart also, and I will replace it also and mark my sewing allowance. At the waistline, I'll mark my waist circumference divided by 4. At this point, go ahead and measure the first dart you have and mark. After marking that, go ahead and measure the second dart you have at the waistline and mark whatever you have there. Then measure the third dart you have on your waistline, mark it, and you can go ahead and mark your sewing allowance. At the waistline, at the top length, sorry, I'm going to mark my hip circumference divided by 4. Go ahead and add a little 1/2 inch, just you have a little cutout when you're cutting out, and add my sewing allowance. So next, I'm just going to go ahead to connect from my chest line to my bust point, to my under bust, down to my waistline, and I'm going to take it down all the way to my hip. So after I'm done connecting, I will label my pattern so that I don't misplace it. So the next thing I'm going to do right now is to create a bust dart. So my bust dart is 1.5. Go ahead and measure the difference between your front and your back. So some people is 2 inches, 3 inches. So I don't have much bust, so mine is a bit smaller, and I'm going to be using 1.5 inches, and I'll go ahead to connect it down to my bust point this way. So after connecting it, all I'm going to do is just to go ahead to shade out my dart so that you won't get confused. After that also, I'll shade all the other darts, and after that we'll go ahead to cut out this pattern. So if you have any question regarding this tutorial, please leave your question at the comment section. And if it's your first time viewing my channel, please hit on the subscribe button. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. So right after cutting this part out, what you're going to do right now is to cut out that part for the dart, for the bust dart. You're going to cut it till you get to the bust point, and you're going to cut from the shoulder from this part also. So after cutting it, you're going to go ahead to blend it this way, and what you're going to do next is to use your sellotape to hold it down so that it doesn't shift from the position that you have right now. And after I'm done doing that, this is what my pattern looks like. So I'll just go ahead to cut all the other parts of this pattern that is not needed. So go ahead to blend in your dart in case it doesn't meet. So now I'm going to give this corset a little curve at the waistline. What I'm going to do right now is to go up by 1.5 inches. So remember, by the time you take out the bust dart, your back waistline and your front waistline is going to outline. Sorry, like what I said, my front measurement is 22 and for the back I'm using 20.5 inches. So by the time you minus 1.5 from 22 inches, you'll be having that 20.5 inches that you have for the back pattern. So just in case you don't understand, you can still ask me questions at the comment section. So after cutting out my pattern, this is what I have, and next we'll be moving over to the back pattern. So for the back pattern, I've cut out all the measurements: shoulder to bust, shoulder to under bust, shoulder to waistline. And if you notice, my top length at the front stopped at this point, and the top length for the back is 1.5 inch upwards, just like I said. So for this pattern, you can go ahead to make use of your under bust, and you can decide not to make use of your under bust measurement. You're still going to arrive at the same answer. So now I'm going to mark my nipple to nipple, which is 7 inches divided by 2, and I'll mark it all the way down. So after I'm done marking that, I'm going to go ahead to place my ruler, and I'm going to connect, drawing a straight line. So after I'm done drawing the line, the next step I'm going to take is to mark my dart intake. So for my dart intake, I'll be marking 1/2 inch at my waistline at both sides. So after marking that, I'm going to go ahead and connect it down to my bust point, and I'll connect to the other part also and take it down at the lower part. So you can do your shoulder to bust plus 1 inch before you draw your dart at this point. And I'll just go ahead also and draw out my dart. So now the next step we're going to take right now is to mark where the back will start. So I'll go down by 1 inch from my chest line, which leads me to my bust point, and I'll connect it down to my chest line. So now the next step I'm going to take is to insert my body circumference. I'll mark my bust circumference divided by 4, mark my sewing allowance, and now at the under bust, I'll mark my under bust circumference, and I'm going to mark my sewing allowance. So you can decide to use this, or you can just connect it down to your waist. Mark your waist circumference, measure the dart intake you have. I'll go ahead and mark my sewing allowance. So after that, I'll be adding additional 1 inch dart because I want to add another dart to the waistline. So mark my hip circumference, and I'll go ahead to mark my 1 inch sewing allowance. So now I'm just going to go ahead to connect from the bust. So just like I said, you can connect from the bust to your under bust, or you can just go ahead to connect down to your waist. So first, let's connect from the bust to the under bust. So I'll take from the bust down to the under bust, down to the waistline, and down to the top length. So this can also work, or you can go ahead to connect from your bust down to your waistline, since we made use of that bust dart in front of the pattern. So now, just like I said, we're going to go ahead and create another dart. I'll just divide what I have at that point, place my ruler, and draw a straight line. So now that 1 inch dart we marked, I'm just going to mark 1/2 inch at both sides of my waist, and I'm going to go ahead to connect it down this way, and I'll connect it down to the lower part. So after doing this, I'll label my pattern. So the next thing we're trying to create now is the lower part. Just like we added a little curve on the waistline of the front, we're going to add 1.5 inches for the back also. So now my back pattern is ready, and I'm going to go ahead and measure about 1.5 inches. You can measure 2 inches, just totally depends on what you want for the lacing bar. And we are going to cut out that part for the lacing bar. I'm just going to make a sign, to indicate for the lacing bar. So now I'm going to go ahead to cut out my pattern. So with this, we are done for this tutorial. If you have any question, please leave it at the comment section, and don't forget to join us in our next video. Thank you. And if you're a returning subscriber also, thank you for always supporting my channel.